Jacked Up Review Show. It's a Jacked Up Review Show. Jacked Up Review Show. It's a Jacked Up Review Show.
Join us as we cover many an insane movie and numerous cult TV phenomenons. Are you ready to get jacked up? Are you with us? Then listen on.
Listener discretion is advised. It's a Jacked Up Review Show. It's a Jacked Up Review Show. Jacked Up Review Show. It's a Jacked Up Review Show. It's a Jacked Up Review Show. Jacked Up Review Show.
So we are talking about more and more filmmakers, and here we go. We got TV producer and movie and TV writer David E. Kelley. That's right. Emmy Award winner. I'm sure he's won a bunch of Golden Globes. And with me today is TV fanatic Brenda Wood. Welcome.
Welcome. It's nice to get up and do something like this and talk about some of my interests. And as I said, doing something a little bit new. I've never been part of a podcast before. So this is kind of cool. So thank you for inviting me to do this. And I hope you like what I have to say.
I hope I don't offend anyone either. But yeah.
There we go.
So getting some of these filmmakers is hard sometimes because sometimes we've seen a bunch of their work, but we don't know how much of an overview we can do. And, there's only so much time, especially if it involves TV. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So David Kelley for me, like I was just saying before you started recording, and I thought you were recording and I didn't realize you weren't. But
Okay.
That's me not knowing how the meeting.
I was not sure if you wanted me to record or not, but it's all good.
Yeah,
So-
it's all good. So when you asked me to join you today, I did have to go back and look at some of the shows. Like I didn't watch anything because not everything is available for streaming on all platforms. And as I mentioned, I'm in Canada, so we don't have Hulu here. We have something called Crave. I spend money on cable in order to get some of the streaming services. I have like Netflix and I have Prime. I've got Disney. I've got the
Nice.
Crave, which gives you access to, I guess, what they call some of the Hulu shows. So I don't always think of them as being Hulu shows. I think of them as being on Crave. But anyway, some of the more recent stuff that he's done, trying to think now, Big Little Lies, 9 Perfect Strangers, I think was him. We saw both of those, my husband and I. I did not yet see The Undoing, wanted to, but there's a list of shows the length of my arm. And sadly, I don't get paid to watch TV full time.
We are not TV critics, last we checked.
There are jobs that I would love to have. I love the job that I do have. I tutor kids in French and French immersion, which is huge up here. I'm bilingual English-French. In my spare time, and especially with coronavirus, watch a lot of TV. And so, and growing up, I was always interested in pop culture and TV, and just some different circumstances. I was ill for a little while, especially in the winter. I mean, it's Canada. From November to March, it's frozen. So if you're not a big fan of cold weather, or you don't have the money to go skiing, you kind of tend to stay home. And I found watching TV and doing my homework soothing, even when I was, in high school in the 80s. So I always did well. didn't have a TV in my room, but I would go down into the room where there was TV and put it on. And my parents weren't TV watchers, except for my mom liking her soap opera. And my dad would watch the news. And that was kind of it. So they weren't big moviegoers either of my parents. And it was a big part of what I enjoyed. So, I used my allowance money to go to the movies, and nobody was saying, oh, Brenda, you shouldn't be watching that show, because they weren't even following pop culture to know what shows were appropriate for kids and what weren't. But that could be different shows. I think David Kelley kind of got started. I was already in my late teens, early 20s. So, I was watching what I wanted for sure. Loved a lot of his stuff. When I went back and looked in order to prepare for today, because I was like, David Kelley, okay, the ones I remember, Picket Fences, Chicago Hope, Big Little Lies. And I was like, what are the other ones that were him? Right. And found a bunch and just were like, oh, right. That was David Kelley. That was David Kelley. That was David Kelley. So that's kind of what I've been doing the last week for my homework.
And it was so wild. And I always thought he was just very well researched and everything. I had no idea until years later. It was like, oh, he was an actual lawyer.
Yes.
In LA before he became a screenwriter. And so he just used this experience. He's quoted as saying that often we try to seduce the audience at the beginning, that this is going to be fun, a romp, or a ride. And then once the ride has begun, to reveal some serious subject matter for them to think about. So that pretty much is him in one scoop. He likes to have some absurdity, some satire, and then just some other hard-pressed issues.
I see that, and I remember that. Again, I can't think of any specific sort of episodes, but just in general, the ones that I watched, that's exactly how I would describe it. I think of Ally McBeal and the sort of the fantasies and the dreams that she had, and this was a lawyer, exactly. And Picket Fences was always quirky. And if you had to ask me words that I would use to describe some of David Kelley's characters and his shows, it would be that quirky, eccentric sort of satire with the social commentary. Maybe it's kind of like that spoonful of sugar to help you swallow the social commentary. I hope it landed with most of his viewers. It did with me. I always learned something, character of the week, story of the week, even in something like a Chicago Hope. I learned more from some of those medical and legal shows than I think I would have. And again, being a Canadian, I learned a lot about the American system and how
nice.
It's done.
You guys got it better over there than we do.
So when it comes to healthcare, yeah, but there are criticisms of it too, right? Everybody gets it for free, which is very, very egalitarian and how it should be. But of course, there's never enough resources to meet everybody's needs timely. And so people who are rich don't get preferential treatment here. But
good.
If I need a knee replacement, I go on a wait list and wait maybe 3 or 4 years to get it done. Right. So the argument for that, if it's affordable, do we want to privatize? And I think the answer up here is no, because there are so many people who are middle class and lower middle class, and so many people who just simply couldn't afford it. So I like the idea that our provinces, which is, equivalent to your states, only they're bigger. We have 10 provinces, you guys have 50 states. And then we have 3 territories, but they're so far up north. It's, it's a different system. But just looking at some of the things, and I mean, a lot of the writers and directors now, you're not talking Dick Wolf, and I haven't watched all the Law and Order stuff at all. But some of the stuff that I have watched is that you learn a lot while you're being entertained. And I think David Kelley hit the mark on that a lot of the time. You'd watch something like the James Spader and William Shatner friendship on Boston, and you'd be like, Denny Crane. And you'd just be like, this is ridiculous. But in between all of that, you got to see something like the friendship and the respect that would grow, even while they would have these ridiculous arguments and these fights. And then, of course, James Spader is off now doing Blacklist, and so it's interesting there to see how some of these people that sort of started on a David Kelley show either came back to him or they moved on to do bigger things and more different things. I won't say
he was
that.
often working for the Fox television through his own company, and then it's like after a while he started getting offers from Disney and Universal now. And I'm like, yes, but it was a very unusual evolution because, like you say, it just you knew him somewhere somehow, but he always had like either a comedy or a drama on TV. And
yeah,
like
he was always on. One would get canceled, another one would start. One would come to an end. There'd be maybe a year's delay, and then there'd be another 1 or 2 shows of his. I would say through the 90s, he was one of the people that was dominating television in the 90s.
1,000%.
Like I said,
yeah.
Ally McBeal, Boston Legal, The Practice. I'm naming them out of order, I'm sure. Chicago Hope, Picket Fences. Those are the big ones that come to mind for
Definitely
me.
the big ones.
I watched Doogie Howser. I watched that one with Robin Williams. I forget what it was called. It was
The Crazy Ones, yeah. That was Robin's final role. And he did a funny sitcom with Kathy Bates called Harry's Law. It was kind of fun. And there was also Boston Public, which was about the inner city school.
Yeah. I'm saying that, and it's coming to mind. Yes.
So it's interesting how you brought up Dick Wolf. So they both have a connection. So basically, both their mentors were Steven Bochco.
Okay.
So, Bochco created LA Law and then handed it off to Kelley when he saw his cult comedy From the Hip starring Judd Nelson. And that's another movie. It really is quite a funny movie that even gets referenced on other sitcoms like Psych. And yeah, Bochco saw that and said, hey, this guy, even though he did it just for fun, and in addition to his real estate legal career, is like, this guy's got some talent. I could use him on my show, which I'm now departing, and I need a head writer. So
yeah. And then I think what happened was that David Kelley kind of took over, and the show got really, really good,
Yep.
And then I remember there was one where he left for a little while. Maybe that was a couple of shows. I was reading that. He left.
Yeah, that was the one. He got bored with it after season 5, and then they realized, oh well, you abandoned ship too soon, buddy. We need you back, and
we need you back to save the show. And I remember as a viewer, I can't think of, again, specific episodes or chapter and verse, but I did remember. And again, I was saying, before we started the podcast today, doing the thing where you're watching a show and something kind of changes, and you're not necessarily watching all of the credits. Again, with names of people that you don't know. And I was one of those people that was, raised to just think about the actors, right? Because that's what you saw. As a consumer and as a teenager and an early 20s person, you weren't in the industry, which most Canadians were not. And growing up, I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to get involved.
Oh, really?
But just wrong. Oh, yeah. Wrong time, wrong place, right? Now, you can put together stuff on YouTube. You can have content on different iMovies. You can be on TikTok. I think I would have enjoyed having these different media, like Justin Bieber gets discovered by Usher, from a YouTube channel or something like that.
You're right.
When I was a kid in the 70s, you could maybe do a couple of plays in some of the big cities. I grew up in Ottawa. We had National Arts Center. I auditioned for a couple of roles. I think I did a background, orphan number 37 in one, but there wasn't any pay or anything from it. It just, you had to move to LA or New York. And I mean, not only were we not American, but my family was not going to uproot from living in Ottawa to move to LA. My dad had a job. It was here. And he was like, when you're an adult, maybe you can do that. And then life didn't lead me in that path, right? So now you can do movies in, Hamilton and Toronto, and Hollywood North has become a thing, right? British Columbia and most of Ontario is used for shows like Schitt's Creek, used for all different stuff. But that's getting off topic from David Kelley.
Well, no, it's somewhat on point. It was interesting how various countries were used for different tax saving credits,
Exactly. And so what I'm getting to with that in my roundabout way is that you started to, as you grew up, started to hear more about the people who were the creators and who were the writers. And then it sort of hits you in the face, like an ice cold bucket of water. You're like, well, of course, the actors, Teen Beat and Tiger Beat and oh my God, the TV Guide would talk about the stars. But then they started to get away from just talking about the stars because they had these smart creators who came out of creators, writers, producers who were big names and who came from, a career that wasn't sort of Hollywood elite. It was, a guy who was a lawyer.
I always heard he was a very nice guy too.
And a nice guy. Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, that's the other thing too. He was just known. I mean, you knew he was married to actress Michelle Pfeiffer, but you never knew really anything else other than that, and that he would just give very funny interviews and talk about how he came up with these various concepts. And I think that was just refreshing because it seemed like for a while there would be, you'd see people interviewed, but they were often just off their rockers or hard to classify. And I think he pretty much just let his work speak for himself.
Yes, and he was always, from what I remember, very classy. And then I can't think of, with a lot of this stuff that's come out recently with, Me Too, I get scared because, again, being the age that I am, one thing is that there are people who are predators, and that needs to be called out. And there are people who just, myself included, we grew up, and it's privilege, and I recognize it, but the stuff that we laughed at, the stuff that we thought was funny before the internet, before social media, before we had a way to communicate with people around the world and see, the different horrors that truly are happening in some countries, it was just, let's laugh at some of the, what we call now the tropes, right? The cliches, the stereotypes. But back in the 70s and the 80s, television was, kind of new, and it was coming into its hugest period ever, where every storyline seemed fresh. A Three's Company, and it was all laughing about Jack and was he gay, right? And so we grew up raised on that and laughing at that because it just seemed sort of ridiculous that, the Mr. Roper, didn't think that he needed that in order for the guy to live with two girls, right? Today, you wouldn't do that. And so the things that I laughed at myself, the things that I thought were funny, the things that I accepted as behavior isn't really a thing anymore. And we've seen that, with Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby and just all of this sort of stuff, where I think with David Kelley, none of that has been a thing.
And that would have been disturbing too when you're dealing with so many legal issues if you had someone misbehaving on your set.
And then we've seen stars have meltdowns. We've seen directors have meltdowns. We've seen a lot of the drama. And now nothing is really a secret, if not for long. It just depends on who's reading your news, and who's watching the show. There are people who watch the show who don't want to know what's happening outside of the show. They don't want to discuss it. They just like to watch it. They don't want to get to know the characters, the producers, any of that. Then there are people like me who, didn't watch all the credits when I was younger. And now, when I say now, it's been like 25 years. But in my 20s, discovered that was important. And that these people, no duh, Brenda, like, how do you think the hair looked so good? Or where do you think the costumes came from? And so, will admit that I don't know everybody, but really started paying more attention to that, and paying more attention to that at the Oscars and the different awards that were on TV, Golden Globes, best cinematography, best editing, best everything. And so, watching for more of that and saying, well, if this movie had it, even though this movie didn't get nominated or this TV show didn't get nominated, clearly they have those people on set too. And so paying more attention to that and being more intentional about getting to know who is involved in a project and how many projects those people can be involved in at once. Like the prop runners and the boom operators and just all of that.
Certain editors and cinematographers now are a big thing with movies. Now everyone's paying more attention to them than ever because they want to know why something just looks so stunning. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think it's helped that there's a lot of actors who have now gotten into the industry. So like if people see Ron Howard's producing something or Tina Fey's coming out with a wacky script, then everyone's instantly interested because they're so familiar with their on-screen persona.
On screen, yeah. And learning about now how Broadway actors will, often do TV, especially in New York, between
There'll
shows.
be a cartoon voiceover, and then, they'll appear in one of the New York-based shows. So,
and then all the voiceovers, and then even to pay attention, not only, as I was saying, in Canada, in the States too, it's not all filmed in Hollywood and New York. There is a lot of location stuff. And so getting to know, in Canada, in the States, obviously I'm not as familiar with the European and African locations until a movie comes out and they say they were filming in Malta or they were filming in Morocco or whatever. And it looks good. It looks really good, right? Australia, New Zealand, and that can be subbed in as American or a Canadian, like Schitt's Creek, for example. But getting back to David Kelley, just what I liked about his stuff was that, in a nutshell, he could introduce you to some of the quirkiest, bizarre situations, and yet they were believable for at least 5 years.
Right.
Which I think is pretty cool. Like, a young guy becomes a doctor, like 12-year-old genius kid becomes it, or was he 14 or something, becomes a doctor. And that opened you up to searching in the news, like, okay, where did this story come from? And you were then able to, learn that, there are kids who are in college. Your gifted classmate might well go on to be someone who's getting their career started early. And I like to think, something like Doogie Howser, kind of led us to young Sheldon and the Big Bang Theory,
I think so, because he had something for everybody. He would have something for the kids. He'd had something for the older adult crowd. And there was even just something for I think, the entire, just either gender, either demographic. There's just always just something. And you never knew where it was going. Because like you say, Picket Fences is kind of a family show, but then it's also kind of a weird Twin Peaks X-Files kind of show. So it's the fact that he wanted to cross it over, yet kind of still made you kind of wonder if it is kind of in the same universe somehow, somewhere. And
I think
he does a little funny other Easter eggs too. Like, it took me a while to actually realize the Practice Alley and Legal were all in the same universe, because everyone came. Even Boston Public's, the school one is in the same universe. And I didn't know. I just saw parts of those and they were just so different. I didn't put that together. I was like, oh, those are all related. Okay. Interesting.
Didn't some of those characters and storylines started crossovers too, didn't they?
Yeah. And he's still to date, like the one to win, like, I think, let me see. I think it's the Golden Globe for best drama and best comedy in the same year. So I mean,
yeah. And I like now that shows they're kind of following that model, where it's not just a suspense, it's a comedy and a thriller at the same time. And I think that other people, you can't help but learn from the pioneers who came before you, right? And so I like that David Kelley's things always feel a little bit fresh. I noticed he's lately doing a lot of work with Nicole Kidman. There's been
Yes.
Big Little Lies. There's been 9 Perfect Strangers.
Even when I'm disappointed by one of his shows, like I was disappointed by Big Sky. It just wasn't all that interesting kidnapping show. But see, it was still unlike anything else that's on right now. So I think that's just it. Like if he has a show that captures your attention or that you kind of just shrug and don't really care for, you're still just like, yeah, I can see why everyone was attached to that, though, unlike other shows where you're like, what were they thinking, you know?
Yeah. And it's funny because, like I say, you know, even with the PVR that tapes 8 shows in a day, you know, I don't have 8 hours to watch TV every day.
No.
You know, there's different things going on. So I have to pick and choose. Sadly, we didn't do Big Sky. We chose something else. But the beauty that what I'm hoping is Netflix and Crave, as I said, which is kind of like our HBO, Hulu, and sometimes Peacock shows, stuff like that, like shows that, you know, you wouldn't think would be available outside of the US. Don't get me started on geolocking, because that is a conversation that I can have for 3 hours. So frustrating. Canada and America are very different, but we're also very similar, and we share our entertainment cross-border. And every now and again, there'll be a show or an actor will talk about an indie movie that they've done or a show that's available on Hulu. And then I go to Crave, or I think, okay, I have to wait 6 months, but then it's just like crickets. Like I recently subscribed to RBET up here because I wanted to watch The Game 2021. And it's got some good talent in it, nothing to do with David Kelley. And I'm a big Tim Daly fan, right? Have been since Wings, just loved him in Madam Secretary. And really want to see this show. I subscribe to Paramount Plus. Paramount Plus in Canada doesn't have it. I subscribe to BET in Canada. BET in Canada doesn't have it. Hello, I would like to watch this show, and I pay streaming services, but at the border, the signal's turned off. I'm not sure why. Probably gets into all sorts of licensing and costs and stuff. But what I'm learning now is, rather than just be the person that says, you know, oh, forget it, it's never going to happen, because of spaces like social media and an ability to contact these companies or talk to other like-minded individuals, I like social media for good. Right. And that's where I can reach out and I can be literally tweeting to some of these companies and say, could you please let me know if this is going to be available? Whereas 20 and 30 years ago, you couldn't do that. You had to like send a snail mail letter and hope that maybe it landed on somebody's desk. Right. And I think that David Kelley, just existing at the time that he did, I mean, he still does, obviously, but being one of those people that was around in, you know, at the beginning of these different types of shows, he had that fresh landscape and that interesting background, you know, being a lawyer, of being a people watcher, of knowing people from all of these different sort of walks of life and these different career paths, and being able to do the research. And it wasn't tired. You know, there hadn't been 30 TV shows. There hadn't been 8 million law, cop, and doctor shows. The genre was just getting going, and he was part of it. Right. So
1,000%. Yep.
You know, he had the Picket Fences with the quirkiness. He had Ally McBeal. He had The Practice. He had, you know, Boston Legal as the spinoff sort of from there, and giving a lot of.
And that took me a while to realize. It's like, wow, those guys started on that show, which was serious, and in that final year, like, I don't think any other show has been able to do that well, where they kind of keep the same tone and then slowly have some, you know, nutty new characters who just totally steal that show and make everyone forget, oh, there's a lot of cast changes. But I mean, he had to do that because basically his budget got stripped away. And so he's like, I can't hire some of the same people I've had since we're out the door running. So I think he, like you say, he found ways to be creative and never do the same thing again and again. Like, you can't compare any of these shows. You can, but you're not even.
It's not even close. Yeah, it's not even close. And then some of the stuff that's memorable, as I said, I can't go back and rewatch all this stuff. But even just having you say, you know, and I went back on the internet, I'm like, okay, David Kelley. There were a couple that stuck in my mind. And then I went back and I just did a little bit of an internet search, and I was just like, yes, I watched that. And I remember this. And, oh, I watched that. And I remember that. And, oh, right, Doogie Howser. And just like it just right away. And the quirky makes it memorable and funny, but it also makes these people seem relatable. And that's the big thing now, I think, in TV is people want authentic characters. People are tired of being lied to. They're tired of duplicity, and they want truth. And so a character who is flawed, but not necessarily flawed as a criminal, but just flawed as a human. And I think we saw a lot of that in Big Little Lies, right? With the women, they're moms and they're successful, and they seem to have money, but yet, they look like dumpster fires behind doors, in closed doors.
Totally.
They're yelling at their kids, and they're competing with the Joneses, and they're stressed about their family and family secrets. And I mean, what family doesn't have that, right? There's always that family member that you just in your own personal life. I have them in mine, right?
1,000%.
Because who knows who's going to hear this, right? But we all have, cousins and brothers and kids, and maybe it's the spouse, right? And you're just kind of like, how am I ever going to solve this problem? And then you realize rich and famous have the same problems you do. And so it's kind of opened that up. And media now, I think, for actors and actresses and producers and for EPs, executive producers and directors, and we all kind of get to follow them and to read what they have to say. An example of that to me is Eric Stoltz, right? Like Eric Stoltz was on Chicago Hope. I'd forgotten about that.
He was great there, yeah.
Great there. And I mean, tying that back to my favorite Madam Secretary right now, on the show and behind the scenes with the show. And he works with Bull a lot. And just how these actors, it's kind of like an explosion, kind of like spider webs that have, in a good way, you watch like Cameron Manheim. These characters didn't do a David Kelley show and disappear. Most of them did a David Kelley show, and then they were everywhere, right? Yeah. So I just...
And he gave all the characters something to do, as opposed to just standing there doing nothing, not sure what to do. And sometimes you can tell he was kind of just too brilliant for his own good. Like Boston Legal often ends with them reminiscing on a rooftop about, their politics and how they're friends. And he's like, that wasn't even intended. But, by episode 2, we knew we're going to end every episode this way. I'm like, well, see, that's just it. At least, And in the special features for that show, he even remarks about how he doesn't believe in backstory because, he learned the hard way. If you introduce something and it's not working, it's very hard to pivot out of that. So he's just like, he essentially, one guy who was the creative consultant on both Chicago Hope and directed and produced a bunch of his shows was Bill D'Elia. He's the father of comedian Chris D'Elia, who recently got in some Me Too trouble, as well as the creator of Judging Amy. So there you go. He launched a bunch of careers behind the scenes as well. But that guy noted how, often David just gives you the keys to his cars and you got to just, be on his level. But everyone's motivated to be on his level because he's like, he does so much of the writing. He's not like most producers where, they just come up with, write the first 2 episodes and then tell you the rules, and approve who's going to write what. He would do so much rewriting and then even just coming up with the stories and then writing them. And I read on one glossary how he wasn't always that way. At first, he was not wanting to really let anyone in. And then eventually, I think he pretty much, all at LA Law, those time he was there, he pretty much had time to learn how any show can just eventually go downhill. And he pretty much just had to give his anything he was doing 100%. After a while, it's like eventually it will go downhill, and sometimes it would because he would just have to leave. He was be starting a few different shows. So I think now he's got so much in production. He's got a miniseries version of Presumed Innocent by Scott Turow in development for Apple.
That's the kind of thing that intrigues me, and I'll want to watch that.
Oh, he's got.
We've read, Yeah, and I love that the different development deals that, like as you say, that are getting started, and I'm learning too. You know, being the age that I am, 51, how to transform my TV watching. It used to be that literally, you know, I've watched TV grow from black and white, black and white to color. We had a black and white set, even though it was the early 70s. Getting a color set, then getting a remote, then getting a VCR. Like I grew up through that in the 70s and the 80s, right? And then, you know, Guide, like I said, Tiger Beat, People Magazine, you know, even some of the tabloids, until you realize that was just kind of crazy, and how those headlines could still suck you in. You know, you'd be standing there at the grocery store and you'd be reading, and then you'd be like, okay, Brenda, no, don't revel in people's misery. And none of that's true, right? Or there might be a grain of truth and somebody's just run with it and made it into something 850,000 times bigger than it ever needed to be, right? But things like In Style, where you started to connect with these, it used to be like, you know, the little people that watched the TV and the people that created the shows, and you could never sort of merge the two. It was mysterious, and it was all part of that, you know. Well,
he was pretty much getting the ones who were in movies but were being underused. So yeah, he was kind of cheating it a little bit before it became, oh, now you're acknowledging both mediums. And
yeah, and letting people, and that whole the mysticism is still there, but we get to know more about our characters. And so the transformational TV watching lets you really appreciate these characters, and then you see what they go on and do. And I think they're influenced, having worked with Kelley, because they've seen how to do a character that is not sort of, you know, one or two dimensional. They've learned how to do characters that have some depth and that have, you know, everything from the professional side to how they treat their family, to how they treat, you know, the PTA council that they're on, to even getting involved in collaborating behind the scenes on the show. And so watching that as a viewer is beautiful, because when you then go and follow someone on social media, or, you know, you pick up an interview, it's not just the standard boilerplate. Well, how did you feel? How nice are the clothes? Isn't it awesome to be in this show? You know, that's sort of still there, but there's so much more to it. And I think David Kelley really was a pioneer in giving us characters that were like that. You would laugh and cry with these characters in the show. You know, you'd want to smack Denny Crane. And to me, that was a big one, because Shatner is Captain Kirk, right?
Right.
And there are people who are characters and they can't sort of get out of them. You know, they're beautiful, brilliant characters, but the trouble
and who would have
is
thought he could do that kind of comedy, you know?
You know, and so I know Kelsey Grammer has tried to break out of the Frasier, but he was Frasier for so long that depending on what cable services you have, you might not have known that he's tried a couple of other roles. And some of them worked and some of them didn't. That's just, you know, that example. Whereas with William Shatner, such a big role in Denny Crane, that there are people out there that you ask about William Shatner, Bill Shatner, and it's like, oh, well, he was on Star Trek and he was on Boston Legal. And so able to break out of that. I noticed he did that
with a bunch. He took a bunch of even just veterans and would even have them be in like brief recurring roles or featured guest spots, and
featured guests, like Hector Elizondo, you know, that just everywhere, and you know,
virtually everyone on Chicago Hub, I noticed, has started directing a bunch of his shows, or they became actor turned directors. Like Peter Berg and Jon Favreau were on there. Vonda Curtis Hall, another one, is
right.
Like, Shane Brooke is now on Star Trek Discovery, so it's like, that's And who else was I going to bring up that I noticed moved around a lot like that? Adam Arkin, who is also been doing a lot of directing, but everyone previously knew him as like, hey, is that one guy who's the son of Alan Arkin? It's like,
and then I was going to say Courtney Thorne Smith, if I'm getting the name right. I mean, I can't think of the order of the shows now, but
Yeah,
you know,
she was on Ally.
McBeal,
Yep.
Melrose Place, that weird, that funky sitcom in the
You got
early
people
90s.
from all kinds of walks of life. So you get them from
All
soap
walks.
operas and other sitcoms and put them in a serious show. Who's the other guy? Lucy Liu was on there. So it was like, yeah, everybody got their start on some kind of show. And
Some kind of show. And then I don't remember who did Brothers and Sisters. I don't think that was David Kelley. But
that was Callista, yeah.
That was Callista, right? And Callista moved and did, you know, and I thought I liked her on Ally McBeal, but it was a little quirky, a little weird. And then I loved her as Kitty, you know, with Rob Lowe on Brothers and Sisters. And so you tended to follow the actors, and you started to realize you were following the writers too. And it became something, the writers and the creators, and it became something like, you know, okay, oh, this is a David Kelley show. Well, then frig, I'm in. Right?
Yeah, LA Law and Ally both had some stuff that didn't age too well, but I mean, there's even some shows that you can even still find by him that are on YouTube that are bound to become, you just have a feeling that they're kind of cult hits in their own right. Like, and just like his movies, I mean, Gillian on her 37th birthday is kind of a cult movie that stars his wife. And I saw it, I was like, that was just a pleasant Frank Capra-esque kind of movie. But I mean, Mystery Alaska and Lake Placid came out in the same year, and they're both very outrageous comedies. One's kind of making fun of creature features. The other's making fun of, again, kind of like Picket Fences, small-minded people in a small town who, you know, are on this cocky sports team. And so it's like, neither did too hot with critics, but they're kind of, I see people constantly referencing them in some capacity. And it's like, well, so there you go. He just, but I think he's stuck with TV. He's like, okay, the right people get it, but movies are a little too risky because you're only, you know, if they don't perform, then you're out of the game. So it's just better off to just stick with TV because, you know, you can keep evolving it.
And you keep evolving it, and you can retool it. And then now, I don't know how it works in terms of paying the artists and stuff. I certainly hope that it goes back.
Residuals, yeah, especially from writers.
And what I'm discovering now is that, you know, as I said to you at the beginning of the show or before we started rolling, that you know, with the VCR, you had to choose, right? In the time that
my mother was the same way. She'd come home and want to watch Hope, but she had to make sure, you know, okay, well, you just got home now, but you gotta start watching now.
And then they moved some of his shows around too, which is tough, and ended some of them because they were like Thursday night shows and they became Tuesday night shows. And I was one of those people that followed, but not everybody has the time for that. My husband and I couldn't have kids, right? Which, I mean, we long since made our peace with, and I tutor kids, and I have 30 kids that I work with. So that's, you know, that's fine. Absolutely fine. But people with kids that are kind of like, okay, my show, it comes on Tuesdays, it comes on at 8:00. They sit down, they put it on, it's not there anymore. They're just like, well, frig, where'd it go? And then they can't watch it for 6 weeks. You know, shows that are put on Sunday night on CBS. I don't know who had the football contract first, but I know for me, you know, and I know you might want to shoot me for this because I know Americans love football. I dislike Sunday night TV show programming. Not because, I mean, I love Madam Secretary, but this is what I say pisses me off is that they'll put on a 10 o'clock show and be damned if during football season you can ever watch that show. It's moved. Football never ends on time, ever. And so you're supposed to start at 10, starts at 10:30, 10:45. Well, I got to tell you, if you've set a PVR to tape your 10 p.m. show and Monday morning,
you're only going to see 10 minutes of it. Yeah.
You're only going to see 10 minutes of it. You get mad and you might stop watching the show. You know, people don't have time. But with streaming services now in the mix, my husband will joke that I'm living in the 1990s again. Because I'm going back and I'm finding shows that, and that's the other thing too, now that they've got this binge watching thing going on, which is a different delivery system where you're meant to watch the whole show in a week or 2 week or even in a weekend span, you have to really watch your continuity and all of that, because people will literally sit there and watch 2 episodes, 3 episodes, 4 episodes in a row and be like, why is that history different. And, oh, this character did this. Whereas when it was a weekly serial, I forgot, right? Because you watch it, it'd be on for 12 weeks. It would be off over Christmas. It would come back in January with 2 or 3 episodes. Then it might do 3 or 4 for February sweeps. Then they'd be off in March. And then they'd come back for, 8 episodes. And then there'd be a cliffhanger.
They have recaps, but it only works so much, yeah.
It only worked. And so year to year, you didn't always remember what happened, or you forgot. They do a flashback show to remind you what happened in the first 2 or 3 seasons, because by season 6, you're like, oh, right, that was the guy's dad. Or he did mention that he dated this character and we haven't seen her in 4 years, or whatever, right? Now you can go back, and when you have a memory that starts to fade, which starts to happen at my age, you can go back and binge the shows. And some of them work on a binge platform, some of them don't. But what it does is it allows you to see it and go, I'm snapping my fingers, and it's like, yep, yes, right? So they're not all David Kelley shows, but there's some David Kelley shows, just by virtue of you bringing this up and asking me to do this, I'm like, damn, I'm going to see if I can find some of these old shows, because it has been a while, like I noticed when Tom Skerritt came on, and again, I'm going back to Madam Secretary, I apologize. Tom Skerritt was Tim Daly's dad, and I'm thinking to myself, how does that work? Are they really that far age? But I don't really remember. I remember Picket Fences as being like 30 years ago. So, 25, 30 years ago. So maybe that's possible, but maybe it isn't. Maybe Tim and Tom were only like 10 years apart in age. And
There you go. Yeah. The casting was always inspired, but at the same time, like you say, it was interesting in that you never really knew what kind of a show you were going to get. But like you also stated, it was from that point on, you would kind of remember when you saw them in future roles, like, yeah, weren't they on some kind of wacky, just nutty show? And of course, Kelley's behind it. So it's like, yeah, that's why I remember the character, because they came up with this. But it was also interesting in that, yeah, I mean, I saw that with plenty of their other ones. I love how basically Mark Harmon pretty much took everyone he worked with on Chicago Hope and just moved him over to NCIS, Rocky Carroll especially. And both of them even got into some occasional directing as well. So I think that's just it. He brought out the best in everybody. They just became increasingly inspired.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I think, owe their extended careers to that, because they were so memorable that other writers, producers, directors, and creators wanted to work with them because they did such a good job. And I think, like you say, Kelley gave everybody a chance, and it just...
He inserts a lot of other Easter eggs, too, since they were Fox properties, like in, I think it's Boston Public and parts... I could have sworn I heard it in an episode of The Practice. Basically, he implies that the hospital they're going to, since it's set in Boston, is actually the titular hospital from St. Elsewhere. So I was like, that's funny. But Boston Legal, they imply that they're eating at the same cafeteria as the one in Cheers. So I was like, geez, this is a twisted universe that they're creating here.
Yeah, very much so. Now that you say that, I'm remembering some of that. And at the time, you kind of be blown away. And then it was kind of a way to do a crossover without actually having to do a crossover sometimes, just mentioning something. And then seeing the characters and
even Chicago Hope, they imply that they're trained by Dr. Craig and a bunch of other people from elsewhere. Yeah. So I'm like, so that's funny, is like, that just shows you how much they just love what they're doing, instead of, like you say, they're just getting too cute for their own good. And you're just like, okay.
And the research that goes into it to make those things stick. So you're not talking about being trained in a hospital that really was in a different city. I found that, again, probably because he was a lawyer, stickler for details, right? And so the characters were consistent. It wasn't like, he forgot or got lazy about it. And again, I remember reading, now I forget who said the quote, but it was something like, well, David left and we just started to watch the show, fall apart. And they needed 10 writers to come on and different producers to come on to do the job of one David, and so they wanted him back. And he just had this dedication to getting it right most of the time. I'm sure there were mistakes and foibles and things.
At least he owned up to it instead of just letting it get progressively worse.
Yeah. And I remember reading some articles about how, I think it was with Chicago Hope, that the show was, and I did notice changes in it, and then how he was coming back and how they did renew it for that 6th season. And they kind of wrapped stuff up. And he came back and he at least got them a 6th season. And then a lot of those characters moved on to other things. Like, Mandy Patinkin went on and did Criminal Minds. And then...
and Thomas Gibson. So there's another connection, but yeah.
Yeah. So moving on to other shows with other people. And then, not always liking where they went, which I think was what with Mandy's didn't enjoy. I can't speak for him because I don't know him, but from what I've read,
he
didn't love Criminal Minds, didn't love the sick and depraved storylines that were coming up every week, and just didn't want to do it past season 2, right? So, but I mean, I love Mandy, and I'm watching him now in what is it, the Good Fight, and of course we've all seen The Princess Bride.
He was great in Homeland, and so
just sort of everywhere. And again, like you kind of look back, and I think David Kelley is one of those people where if you look at a lot of the people in New York and in Hollywood and in Chicago, but in this field, this entertainment field, and you'll be able to draw a lot of lines for actors and actresses and other people that work behind the scenes. And he's one of those people that you can draw those lines back to, like a seminal icon that you just, without him, I think a lot of these people might have pursued different paths, or it might have been very, very different, and now we recognize them. Someone walks into a show and I'm like, that's Cameron Manheim. I remember her. That's so-and-so. I remember them. Oh, right. This person, this creator, this producer, this one. And now with IMDb and Wikipedia and EP guides and all of this, able to go back and binge because of Netflix and as I said, for Canadians crave, you're able to go back and go, this universe is there's just spider webs between all of these people.
He's got a dozen other programs now to where it's like, I love how here Hulu basically has most of his shows in the vault, so they're going to continually be rediscovered by people eventually. And I mean, it's inevitable, but for whatever reason, it's just kind of taken a while because he just wasn't as high up as other producers, or like say maybe Joel Silver or Jerry Bruckheimer, who, just kind of had more quantity versus quality. And it was just interesting too, how, like you say, there's also just kind of something for everyone in his work. So it's just like, okay, well, if you don't like this, you'll probably like that. And at least that he's going to, again, just surprise you. Like, again, I haven't seen Goliath yet, but I've heard just wonderful things. I heard it.
I've heard a lot about Goliath.
I heard people have kept watching it even when they were frustrated with season 2 and free, and it lasted 5 years on Prime and was one of their top rated original programs. But I definitely will be checking out his upcoming Lincoln Lawyer show, and that says a lot because like that one was in development hell for quite a while. And, Michael Connelly was getting involved with adapting his works into TV shows along with Bosch. And then he decided, okay, screw it. I'm not going to make it be in the same universe like my books. But, basically it got delayed by COVID. And then they did some recasting or some shit like that. And then CBS decided to not honor their deal and not pick it up. And then A&E had to spend equal amount of time both suing them for breach of contract and then getting it picked up for Netflix to air. So it's like, man, that's
lawyer. And did they not at some point, it could have seemed to me they had like a half-hour show or something. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was an hour-long show and it lasted for like 10 episodes or something, and then it disappeared. Maybe I'm thinking of something different. Maybe
there's
that was
this one he did called
Firm or something.
I think that's it was called Snoops. It had Gina Gershon and a lot of these other people. And fun fact, Gershon reprised that role in a later episode of The Practice. So I was like, that's kind of wild. So that's connecting his whole Boston universe. So
connecting the universe, exactly. Connecting the universe. And so, yeah, and now with, as you say, you can go and do these development deals. And I think it helps these people to grow, because David Kelley, I don't think will ever stagnate. And he's still got a lot in what he can do and what he can draw upon.
I've never heard anything about him yelling at people, making them feel, unworthy, or
he's not canceled, so
and because he wrote so much of his episodes of all his shows, like doing some serious writing and heavy involvement in the style and casting, he really does deserve the credit, unlike other people who it's like, okay, Jerry Bruckheimer, you just put your name on it,
Well, that's the other thing, right?
You weren't on set,
I'm trying to think of the names that I see, right? I see Dick Wolf a lot. I see Jerry Bruckheimer a lot. Oh my God. I'm trying to think.
Obviously, Bochco got to that point after a while where he was just hiring writers. But I do recall Kelley said he spoke very highly of him when he passed away from leukemia. Bochco, he was just like, this dude was an absolute mentor, and literally I owe my whole career to him. I was like, okay, interesting.
Yeah, very.
You see other people who get, even when they don't mean to be anal retentive, they still come off as a little prickly, because basically there's just creative differences, and people like to misquote without asking them, are you sure you want me to print this? But I've never heard anyone say, hey, he was too impatient. And even when he wasn't knowledgeable about how long special effects took to air, I know on Ally McBeal's famous baby sequence, that was CGI and everything, that made some headlines.
Mm-hmm.
He was still, you never heard anything about him coming to set and shutting stuff down and saying, hey guys, this isn't what I ordered. And it seems like he would mainly just be on set. Just his version of supervising was, leaving everyone alone and just saying, hey, just do your thing. Don't look at me. I'm just here to make sure you got what you need.
Yeah.
And I will say, unlike most shows, I never get a sense that like any show that he made like didn't really know what it wanted to be. It's just so, he's often just so wacky and just want to go along for the ride, unlike other shows where you're like, that's kind of cute, but I don't think it'll last, it's probably gonna get canceled. So I think he, like you say, he had some fortunate luck, but he made use of every minute, just like he would. And I think he, coming from an actual, office lifestyle, and even I saw he was part of a comedy troupe where he made poetry that was mocking the Constitution and everything. I think he just already had that satirical mind, and just business profession already built into him. So he was already kind of ahead of the curve, and he just had to find out how to just kind of make it blend.
Make it blend for TV. And when you've got that in you and it works for you, and you're confident enough that it'll work for somebody else, then you don't have to hold back when you put it on paper.
Oh, totally. Even when I usually get annoyed when a filmmaker recasts their actors and uses them too much, but often when he would recast his same actors, he would give them a completely different role. So it didn't feel like a repeat,
Yeah. And that's tiresome too. Sometimes when you watch a show and it's just like, oh, look, and they're back, and oh, surprise, they're doing this again.
Mm-hmm.
Again.
They're playing a jerk again.
Another jerk again. And, these types, right? And I mean, that works I think in sitcoms and stuff, but it is refreshing to see people do different roles. And I think, like I say, David Kelley, provided that baseline. provided for some of the stuff that, as you say, like crazy with Ally McBeal and dancing babies and these arrows that would come and shoot her in the heart.
Elevator shaft death in like season 4 of Helly.
Exactly. And weird stuff. Like I remember, Five-ish Finkel from Picket Fences, and I can't tell you any specific episode, but I do remember that. And I do remember some of these big, passionate arguments in court from that character. And I just remember kind of sitting there. And it wasn't the kind of TV show where you'd sit and flip through a magazine while it was on. It was not background noise. It was appointment television. You'd put down your crossword puzzle. You wouldn't talk to your mom at the same time as the TV show was on because you could sort of get what was going on in the background, right? I don't think that I would have been doing much homework to David Kelley shows.
It would have been impossible. I even tried that with legal back when I was a teen, and I was like, yeah, there's no way I'm getting anything done if I'm in the same room as this awesome show.
The dialogue is witty, the characters are if you were to meet them in one situation and then find out what job they did, they'd be like, you're a lawyer? Oh my God. But then you'd see them in the courtroom and you'd be like, you're brilliant. So it's kind of like Denny Crane, with his ego. And it's like, I'm Denny Crane. I'm Denny Crane. I'm Denny Crane. And I remember he talked
he's
about
dementia Aladdin. He's a sexist and he's a bigot, but you want to know it kind of where it's in on the joke, and you want to just see what other nutty predicament these just bizarre and yet interesting yet just totally politically incorrect characters are going to do next.
Yeah. And this is the other thing, right? Like what was politically incorrect that we laughed at that now you might not get away with, right? And so I'm thinking again of, how Bill Shatner, James Spader, they pulled off that friendship. If they'd have hated each other in real life, you never would have known it. It helped
that he would, I forget her name. One of the female writers on Legal often talked about is like she would find a way to mention some, politics without getting preachy, and then find a way to insert the dark comedy and have it actually kind of just better illustrate the characters to where you wanted to find out more about them. And I think that's just it. It just worked better versus other shows which like you say, people would just remember all the misbehavior and not any actual, context underneath what's supposed to be, what would otherwise be offensive. And so I think that's just it. He just had enough of a backbone. And I mean, even Monday Mornings was interesting because like that was a short-lived TNT show he helped bring to life, which had an interesting cast. Jamie Bamber from Battlestar Galactica being Rames. And
oh yeah,
it was, I remember me and my sister and even I think my mother were watching it just casually, and we're just like, that's some pretty interesting dialogue. And I wouldn't mind seeing more of this. And that was just another one because it wasn't, I think he had to also just navigate the ever-changing way things were marketed. And I think that's just it. When TNT marketed it, everyone was expecting just another ER. And it's like, well, not exactly. It's just a very, dry humored, just guys who work in a hospital, and they're like, oh, like Scrubs. I'm like, well, no, not exactly.
Not exactly. Yeah.
It's just,
yeah. And that was what would happen with, when you talk to your friends and they're like, oh, what are you watching? And you mention a show, or you bring it up yourself. Well, I started watching the show, and people are like, oh, what's that about? And you're like, oh, it's set in a hospital, or it's lawyers. And I'm like, oh God, no lawyers. And you're like, no, you don't understand. These are not typical lawyers. Give it a try. And
even this current show, 9 Perfect Strangers.
Yeah.
It's not exactly like Only Murders in the Building and some of those other wacky Hulu shows, but I can see why it got picked up. It had Samara Weaving, Regina Hall, Bobby Cannavale, and Melissa McCarthy, along with Nicole Kidman, and it was just a very hard to pin down. It's kind of making fun of an Agatha Christie type novel, and it's based on an actual book. And it's just
that's what I was going to say. The connection with Leanne Moriarty. I've read a few of her books, and I can see how many of them can be optioned and made into these limited series, as you call them, right? And I noticed that Leanne Moriarty's books, they're all set in Australia. She's an Australian writer. And so
That totally makes sense.
you know, and yet, so I have to admit, at first with Big Little Lies, I was a little bit put off.
It really gets under your skin, yeah.
Well, no, I was put off because to me, I'm like, okay, I'm a little more like, okay, the book is Australian, the TV show should be Australian, and it was California. And I was like, and they changed this, and they changed this, and none of these people are Australian. Like, frig. But, you know, but it worked. So I got over myself in the first episode, and I thought to myself, like, yeah, this is going to work. And every woman is going to watch this show, and they're going to watch the whole. And they did 2 seasons with Big Little Lies. And I didn't know how they were going to do that because they did kind of come to the end of the book. So then the second season was just sort of like added on. And I think in consultation, and because it's David Kelley and Nicole Kidman and Reese Witherspoon, right, they were able to really put together a second season that worked.
It helped that he was also working with actors who just, again, you know, wanted to do something different with their careers. You know, Laura Dern was wanting to do more TV, and Meryl Streep. When's the last time Meryl Streep did TV? And so, yeah, there you go. I mean,
yes, and Meryl Streep on TV, like, and just exactly. And you know, you're reminding me of some of that. And then with 9 Perfect Strangers, as you said, these incredible people coming together, and the story matched the book, but again, not in Australia, in America, and a little bit to fit the American way of doing things. You know, again, as a Canadian, Canada, America, you know, all these sort of first world countries, you know, with British and French backgrounds and Spanish backgrounds, can all sort of have things that are very, very similar. But then there are some slight differences that you see with the politics and with the nationalism or the patriotism. And so when that's done outside of America, it has to be handled with kid gloves. And so to put it in America, you have to kind of change it and tweak it just a little bit. And so these Australian stories work in America, I think, because of the people that are handling them. And in different hands, they might not have. You know, it might have just gone right over people's head or pissed people off. And this just pissed you off in the way that as a viewer, it made you invested. It didn't make you angry at the show. It made you angry at the character or at the person's motivations. And so you needed to see the little bit of the schadenfreude, like I said, maybe I pronounced that word wrong, where you know, you want to see the like, you want to see the person get their justice, right? That's very satisfying. You know, no matter where you're from, you just want to see that bad guy go down. You know, when it gets more complex, sometimes it's not just a straight line of this person is pure evil and this person is pure nice. You're kind of like, you know, they all have a little bit of karma coming. So, and then you feel sorry for them. And that, I think, is the mark of the good layered story, where you haven't got everybody at the same level of sympathy and empathy and compassion, but you've got different recipes, different building blocks for each character. And so you might want to see this character get a huge comeuppance, but you do feel sorry for their husband. And you want to see that character get everything that she wants, but then you realize she's a little bit evil too. And so this I found with Kelley's characters, they were all complex like this for the most part. I mean, there were some. And
it's hard to explain why you kind of want to check it out. It just doesn't feel like a typical kind of TV. And he's been able to navigate that even regardless of what it's been on, a movie channel, a regular TV network. So, I mean,
it's like that everywhere.
Because you mentioned The Undoing, that was another one. I saw some family members were talking about it. They binge watched it and they're like, you know, that left me thinking for a while. And it's like, okay, well, so they did their job. They left you with some entertainment that, you know, disguises itself as another, you know, award-winning drama. But then there's just a few other just layers. It's like, yeah, but no one else could have really taken this on. You can understand why he would put his name on this and develop it.
And some of them is meant to make you feel uncomfortable too.
He really does handle that pretty well, just like the
He
St.
handles
Elsewhere
it very
people.
well.
Because
Yeah.
there's other people who, like you say, they do too much of that, and you're like, oh boy.
Yeah, you don't want it to ever feel preachy, because if you feel preached at, you get, especially if you're on the other side and you don't agree with it, you feel like somebody's just telling you off and trying to shame you. And so that you don't want to watch anymore, because who needs to feel that shame, right? People watch TV to be informed and entertained, and mostly to be entertained and some to be informed. And I found that David Kelley was able to do a little bit of all of that. He was able to inform you and educate you, and also leave you feeling entertained. And so that's a master who can do that. And I mean, he did get better at it as time went on, but he wasn't awful to start with. He was good. When he started to do that, it felt good and it got better.
Yeah, he kind of became the butt of some jokes by some critics but eventually the show's going to go downhill. But it's like, well, he was able to survive even just people lampooning his work, because I think that's just it. His movies and shows were just so nutty already, to where it's like, okay, well, you guys look like assholes because you're making fun of the guy doing all the mocking,
Yeah.
And you're making an ass out of you instead of just enjoying the comedy.
So just get in there and just enjoy the comedy, learn something from the mistakes. And, this is what I say, I was kind of raised on television, right? I mean, I was raised Catholic. I'm not Catholic anymore and haven't been for a very long time. But, where I learned, I can't give David Kelley credit for this. It was soap operas, where I really saw, I really saw that lies don't work. They do not work, because as a kid, when you're impressionable and you want to make these little fibs and stories up, and you're like, oh, is it gonna hurt? Right?
They eventually don't add up. Yeah.
It never worked out for these people. Never. And I mean, this is, again, it's not David, but it just, when you're someone who watches a lot of TV and it helps parent you a little bit. And I was just like, you know what? Yeah, lying is bad. Never mind the fact that it might hurt somebody down the road, but you're going to just get found out in the end. And then I started to see people in real life, even just simple things like kids lying about their homework or whatever. And it always got found out. So all that did for me was just cement what I'd learned from watching some of these soap operas, that my mom and her friends would watch. And I would just be like, yeah, lesson learned, just be honest, or say it's a secret or it's a surprise. And I can't tell you all the details yet, and you're just going to have to trust me, because lying does not work, And so I found that that's a big theme in a lot of shows, right? And people wanting to keep secrets and protect themselves. And David Kelley was kind of a master at some of that, at showing the characters.
There's plenty of times when, even when it doesn't involve legal stuff, the characters will be saying something, and they're just like, I don't believe you. And the character's just like, they leave it ambiguous to the viewer, to where you get that sense of uneasiness towards, like, either the person's told the lie too many times to where they don't even know what's true anymore, or we, the viewers, get that uneasiness that we would in real life. We're like, well, either way, I just don't trust you now, because you've been lying to me this whole entire time, that even if it's legit now, it's just, I know you're fibbing.
Yeah.
And like you say, I mean, there's plenty of times where it's like, okay, maybe probably the hospital or a legal or even a mansion of all these wacky characters in this town probably wouldn't be like this in real life, but I believe it just because it's just comes across, the way it's presented on screen allows me to just say, well, what if?
Mm-hmm. I agree. And it's
because there's others where, like you say, they get too many different showrunners to where eventually the tone is going to kind of collapse underneath itself. And I think he played most of his cards pretty well.
Yeah. And I think he knew when the stories needed to end too. Because not every story has a 30-year arc. Somebody else who knows how to do that, I can't think of their name right now. Ken Olin, I think, is part of it, is This Is Us. They said it was 6-season story, and I can see that. And so they're wrapping it up this year. And I like writers, producers, directors who sort of know what the story is that they want to tell and have, you know, a 5 to 10 year plan for their characters. And then hopefully they get a chance to reach that penultimate event and then be able to say the story is done and not have you as a viewer get sick of the characters. And I never got sick of David Kelley's shows.
I really didn't either. Even with characters who aren't the most likable, they were able to kind of portray them in a way to where it's like they're kind of self-aware that they're arrogant. Especially when he gets to legal, there are some hysterical breaking the fourth wall, and Chicago Hope especially has a lot of just very wacky dream sequences that really actually echo their uneasiness in their world. It's like, okay, that's not just them being random. It's like, here's a nightmare that doesn't really have anything to do with anything. So if anything, I think he's just one of many people is like they just watched a lot of TV, and by the time St. Elsewhere came along, they were getting the idea of is like, okay, let's not be typical. Let's be typical to where, you know, we get picked up and then, you know,
yeah,
and just do little other subtleties.
And you still have to appeal to mainstream audiences unless you have the clout, which I think David Kelley does now, and has for a while, to do something that's off the wall that's only going to appeal to certain people.
And this might very well be his busiest last few years. I mean, he developing 6 things back to back. I mean, and obviously the love for all his shows just comes across. I've heard various countries have tried to adapt, I think, LA Law and Alley, and then he already has like a Disney basketball drama. So it's like he's accessible to just about every market too. So he's got something for everyone.
Which is the mark of something that is really, really palatable, right?
Because you see other people who do that and you're like, yeah, you're too rude to be kid friendly, or your heart's not really in it to do this very serious role.
Or you're just trying to exploit this franchise to see how much money you can make off of it.
Mm-hmm.
Some franchises feel like that too. It's just like, oh, look, let's make a spinoff.
As much as we love you guys, it's just not working. So yeah,
it's not working, or it's too much of the same, right? It's too much of the same. Mm-hmm. So, you know, like I said, in the era when I was watching TV the most, I'm watching a lot now, and I'm going back, and thankfully, because of the technology, I'm able to go back and rewatch some of those shows back when I was making the decision about the VCR, and I didn't always pick right. You know, sometimes you kind of, you know, you read in, you know, TV Guide, and it would be like, well, these are the 4 medical dramas coming out this year, you know, and I never chose Grey's Anatomy. I chose Chicago Hope. They all kind of started around the same time. I chose Chicago Hope, and I chose ER. I didn't stay with ER till the end. Maybe I should have. Chicago Hope was shorter, so I did watch all of that.
Oh, that's a good example of a show that most people like, but did kind of go on way too long to where, and I think that's a good example of where network TV versus cable, there's just too much at that point. We were getting oversaturated before we did get oversaturated, kind of, you know?
Yeah, I did. And then I'd hear about, you know, certain storylines and certain episodes, and I'd just be like, and then the Law and Order.
I tuned out at that moment versus this. It's funny you bring up Law and Order. Already, Cameron Manheim's like a lieutenant on there now, and then the other 2, Dylan McDermott, is now playing a crime boss, and Steve Harris popped up as a lawyer. So it was like, oh, awesome. So they're pretty much getting all the guys we grew up loving on The Practice, and they're moving them over to Law and Order, but they're playing totally different kinds of characters, and I don't think they would have had those edgy kind of chances had they not been on The Practice.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. This has just been really good talking about this.
Oh, likewise, because I had other people who are like, I know him, I know I've seen something by him, but I don't know where I would begin. And it's just like, and much like other filmmakers we've been meaning to tackle on here, is like, okay, well, what would we bring new to the narrative? And who knows, we may very well be like one of the few podcasts who've actually sat down and talked about someone for an hour.
Yeah. Well, It's really good. And
So,
I
Mr. Kelley,
loved it.
keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you inspired me to kind of go in and put some more thought into it and do a little research. And
Oh, thank you.
and now my husband is going to be like listening to me going, where can I find?
This podcast is on
No.
Anchor and Spotify, and I will send you a link. But
Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting. No, I was very excited to talk to you this morning because again, I love to do new things. I love to branch out, and
hell, if anything, that's what Kelley is. He wants you to branch out and tackle new subject matter.
and new mediums too. When this COVID pandemic started and everything for me switched online, I used to tutor and kids would come to my house, right? That was what I did. And, so I had 30 kids trooping in and out of my small little house here, and in and out. And then everything went online. And I told you, I first started working with computers when I was like 28 years old, right? And even not super great at it. I got my first smartphone. I was like 37, 38 years old. Hardly used it. I was 35, I think, when Facebook came out, or 34. I mean, please, right? We didn't have that. And I am not intuitive when it comes to all of these things. I don't know how to use Google Suite, like all of that. I now know how to use Zoom. I know about cameras. I know about video calls and video conferencing and video chat. I'm tutoring online. I'm watching shows. I'm streaming. I'm thinking that's pretty good from someone who literally 30 years ago, 40 years ago, didn't even have a remote for a television. Like there's been a lot, right? I was the remote. Well, I mean, my parents didn't watch much TV, but my brother treated me as the remote, right? You had to get up and you actually had to flip the dial on your TV. So now, we've got all the social media. We've got the Instagrams and the Tumblrs and I don't even know which ones are super popular. But
and no one will even a decade later. There's just so much to consume.
The only one that's lasted the longest, I find, are Facebook and Twitter, and I'm on them. I was really pleased to see your comment, and it kind of started all of this, where I saw you comment about the designated survivor, Madam Secretary, and I found your podcast. And I
can't wait for you to hear it next week. We tried to do our best with that one because it was a matter of two totally different shows. One's kind of a action drama mystery with a lot of cool speeches written by Kal Penn, who actually worked for Barack Obama, and then Madam Secretary, it's kind of more, there's more a little suspension of disbelief in that, everyone's getting up early in the morning, but it goes for more kind of very intriguing overview on the world mixed in with some CIA mystery. But for the most part, it's just a family drama set in the White House, so it's, but they both have the same agenda in that, one of them serves an independent president. The other is a independent president who, acquired this position through a terrible 9/11 style attack. And so then, but both have the same deal in that, they took a lot of West Wing and Criminal Minds crew members and just had them just work together to, you even mentioned ER. I know one of those shows had some ER guys come on board, and basically they had to craft, how do you think people like this would react in this scenario? One of them is having to become the first female president eventually, and the other just has to find out how does he stand out when he's in an ever-changing, very challenging political landscape that's getting all the more ugly as time wears on.
Yeah. No, I heard it. I think that was the one you released last week. I got to listen to that.
Okay, perfect.
I'm saying I got to hear it, and I liked your style a little bit. Like, I disagreed with some of the things that you guys said, but I liked it, and it wasn't like I wasn't angry. It was more just like, now I really want to talk to this guy. Like I say, that's a little bit David Kelley too, right? It wasn't like, oh, forget it. It was like, this is interesting. And you know what? If I hadn't heard of it, I wouldn't have even known it was there. And so now you guys are on my radar, right?
We try to do shows that haven't even really been talked about much, and there's many I regret. Is like, yeah, if I talked about it now, I would have been totally different because, I had more time to rewatch it, or, now in retrospect, yeah, maybe this character is actually representing this, ideal versus, how they come across on an initial perspective. So yeah, it's very challenging. I mean, we've done some of the FBI and when Chicago shows, and those are other ones that they're going to be on the air for years. So you might even want to do just a recap special when it ends, saying, how did you feel in the first 5 years versus the latter 5 years? And we've done the Star Trek ones too, but we've done it where we like grouped them together. Like, here's these 2 prequel shows, here's these 2 spin-off shows of the main show, and how have they, what was your impression of it growing up watching them versus now where they're all on Netflix and Paramount Plus?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what's good about some of these platforms when you can get the shows is you can go back with a different lens, like as you grow up, even if it was something that, not that your parents watched, but even that something that you watched, but you were a teenager or a 20-year-old, and then coming back 20 and 30 years later and watching it with different eyes. And it's like, yeah, that kid wasn't, that kid was actually kind of a brat. Maybe I was kind of a brat at that age too.
I was hard on him.
Changing to identify with the parents. Like, for example, a show like Family Ties. When Family Ties was on, I was between Jennifer and Mallory's age. I was almost Mallory's age. And so Mallory was just a little bit older and turned 16 just before me and all these little things. And then I thought, like, how cool she's dating this guy, and some of the storylines were quite prescient, and quite poignant. And then I watched Jennifer become a teenager and all this sort of stuff. And then like Bill Cosby, like, I don't think any of us really saw that. Maybe some did closer to the industry, but we learned a lot, and I was heartbroken when that happened. It's like, really?
Yeah, we'd all grown up with this in some capacity, and we're like, really?
I loved this show, and then it's just as for us trying to reconcile something that was a great TV show with what was going on behind the scenes, and so
we would hear it on occasion, but we figured, okay, if it's more than just 5 people and it's not just makeup or directors being very picky on what they want, then it's very clear, that the person's late to set or, very hard to get along with. And when it comes down to, they dropped someone or they, made just beyond socially unacceptable behavior and they're hiding behind the entertainment will and fame to, shadow that preclusion, it does get very ugly because, like you say, you want to think, okay, it's just people being creative or having, an off-color exchange of words. But yeah, when it comes down to, hey, you've been doing all this very sneaky stuff that's multiple crimes, then yeah, it can be very deadly. And I mean, it's kind of like with All in the Family. I mean, that was the same kind of thing. It was like Boston Legal. It was in on the joke, but sometimes the jokes weren't always funny to the right certain people. And, the actor did a good job despite hating the material because it was just, it's very offensive. So it is an interesting challenge when you want to see people bring something to life, and sometimes they just don't know what they've signed up for versus they're doing a job, but something's just coming out the way it should. And it's going to get even more challenging post-COVID because everything's got to be shot quick and, no time for reshoots
and stuff. And I think what we might see coming are shows about, people learning that that people that they've had in their lives for a long time really have some differences of opinion that, can the friendship or the allyship or the connections survive that, and do you want it to? People that are, who they support politically. That didn't used to have to drive friendships apart. Now it almost speaks to the core values of who you are. I think especially in America, it's coming to Canada. you know, how people dealt with the pandemic. Not so much these horror stories about what it's like to live through one, but more, how did you handle it? You know, when people brought up vaccines and masking, and are you a greater good person, or are you an individual, and where do you fit on that scale?
Great question.
You know, looking at you know, the situation that's happening right now with Ukraine. You know, to me that sounds like
That's
amazing,
basically a Madam Secretary episode. Yeah.
no, but I mean, yeah, that guy, like he was.
Difference is that would have been solved after 1 or 2 episodes, and here, you know, we got something that just looks like endless gloom. You know.
Yeah, exactly. And we actually discussed that a little bit on the Madam Secretary boards. You know, a lot of people were saying, you know, oh, I need Elizabeth right now. And other people are much more serious about it. And they're saying, you know, like, this isn't a 1-hour show, guys. These are people's lives. But I think what I commented, and something that I said, was along the lines of, I think what a lot of people are missing is that for some people, when they say, I want Elizabeth McCord right now, what they're saying is they would like, you know, more aspirational leaders. They would like to have, you know, presidents and prime ministers and world leaders who can go in and can get the job done without humiliation and without.
I mean, that's how we were with other earlier shows. Like with 24, we wanted to see what could possibly happen when people realize that everything they've been taught to do, all the rules they abide by, literally just don't apply when there's just inevitable you know, attacks or other conspiracies around the corner. And, you know, with West Wing, you had it where basically all these, you know, people are having to make their careers and realize that they're going to be doing some very, you know, hard to do campaigning, as well as getting bills passed that are very heated. And so, yeah, I think all our shows, you know, the best ones build on the conversations that the other one doesn't want to talk about, and they become two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. And anybody that's got a pulse in that arena, we've been talking about David Kelley, but you know, there are a lot of creators and writers out there. Not all, they don't all have that skill. They're very,
not all.
and they can put together a decent show that's got a few years in it of, you know, getting people to laugh, getting people to come together and have, you know, a family unity event, right? And that's good. You need that. But you do need those avant-garde sort of folks who are willing to poke the bear and know that they can't just appeal to one type of audience. They can't just be for Democrats. They can't just be for, you know, people who like, you know, traditional, you know, the police are the gods and everybody's white. You know,
yeah.
I think that that's something that they're starting to realize over on Blue Bloods, right? I mean, I like Blue Bloods. I've been watching Blue Bloods for a while. But even for me in the evolution of watching that show, at first it was like, okay, it's this family and they're all involved and it's Tom Selleck and the whole family's in the police. And I'm like, well, I've heard of cop dynasties before, so why not? But then, you know, with all of this stuff, defund the police, and what that really means, because we have that up here in Canada too, and it's not about not wanting protection from crime. I think the message is lost there. It's about making sure that people don't go into situations guns blazing 24/7.
Well, that's just it. It's a Civil Rights Act, and unfortunately, you know, it's kind of the same difference between. You'll hear a lot of people talk about an event where people are again protesting, and sometimes the very hackneyed reporters will mention it as a riot. It's like, well, hold on now. Did it become a riot? Or was it just a protest, you know, where someone was arrested? There's a difference. So I think that's just it. We're having to call out people on what does the language actually mean. And it's just very frustrating because some people, they don't know what that means. They're idiots. And like you say, defunding, you know, it just meant, okay, we're going to have to defund the police unions there. But everyone just stretched out the word defund, where they're like, oh, so you just want to take away cops? Oh, well, what will we do about crime? And it just kind of we're playing into so many different things. We got the fear mongers, we got the, minorities versus whites culture wars. So it was already going to get ugly and uglier by the minute. So yeah, it's not easy to talk about certain things. I don't think we'll be able to talk about it for even another 20 years. It's going to keep getting worse. So
it's and a lot of the, and somebody who can delve into these issues. I mean, I think Barbara Hall can. David Kelley definitely can.
She came from the Chicago Hope School, so there you go.
There you go. Yeah, Barbara Hall. Yeah, I mean that's another 2-hour conversation in and of itself.
She's awesome. Yeah,
awesome. So many of these people, and my situation is that I'm Canadian with a lot of American relatives and friends.
Same.
I'm interested in politics. I present white, but I'm 50% black, and in Canada, it's a little easier than it was in America to have a mixed race family. But my dad is from the Caribbean, was from the Caribbean. He passed away 4 years ago. But so many situations where if it was my father and I together, because I'm very, I almost thought I was albino growing up, right? I'm not, but I'm very, very pale. And having my dad be who he was, people would see the two of us together and they would be like, almost accusing my dad, like, where did you get this girl? It never occurred to people that it never occurred to people that he could actually be my biological dad. Right. And so growing up with that experience, was different. My brother looks more like my dad, not fully a person of color, but a person with some more color in him than I have. And then my mom is a brunette with pale skin. She's from Canada, from the Eastern Coast. And so, to grow up with an intergenerational family and a mixed family, and not have the same talks that people had in the States, that wasn't needed here. But at the same point, seeing the microaggressions and people that are, it's almost worse when they're nice. I always had people touching my hair going, your hair is 3 or 4 different colors. And I would be like, well, yes, because I have this in me. And, oh, really? Let's braid your hair. And this kind of stuff would happen to me in school. And it was a different time, right? And then the things that I laughed at, because I realized, we're not talking about that. We're talking about David Kelley. But I think that there are writers and producers and creators out there that I think he's doing a lot of stuff right now, but he could also be one of these people that with the right programming can bring people together a little bit more by showing that there are a few people that I would trust to create and to develop series that will talk about what we find just absolutely painful now. I think him working.
It's so true. It's a rare skill because there's other people who they know what they want to say, but they don't know how to make it entertaining, let alone relevant, or like you say, not preachy.
Yeah. I'm thinking, it
doesn't matter what side of the argument you're on. If you're just getting very annoyed by, okay, well, no shit, Sherlock, what do we do?
Yeah. I'm thinking, people that come together, like I'm thinking, Ava DuVernay, and here this is dream teams in my head, like an Ava DuVernay or a Tyler Perry working with a David Kelley, or and we can't forget women's issues either. Like he's working with Nicole Kidman, he's working with Reese Witherspoon. He's getting that female perspective. Barbara Hall worked with him, got her chops, as you say, started way back then with the Chicago Hope and all that sort of stuff, and what she's gone on to do, and bringing people together. Men and women and people of color and minority groups. And I think we need more representation of Muslims. There's very little of that on TV. I'm watching a Canadian show called Transplant. and it's a doctor show. And
That's a good one. Yeah.
It's a really good one because we're learning more about that culture. And we need more trans characters and non-binary characters on TV, played by people who are trans and non-binary, because there are trans and non-binary actors, where we need to put that out there and have the show not just be about that, but in community with showing these people working together with, the old stock thinking, the old white stock Canadians, the old white stock Americans, and show that coming together. And I think that the right people with the right clout who haven't written these flash in the pan shows that are on for one season and disappear, could be done. And I think David Kelley is one of those people that could do it. That was something that I thought about a lot this past week. I thought, with the different things that he's done, he could be someone who's part of the solution.
I'm sure he even gets up in the mirror. Like I love how one of these miniseries he is going to actually, people have often talked about, other than that one movie, Gillian, why don't you work with your talented actress wife? And he's actually written a part for her. And I think that's just it. He likes to challenge himself, but he likes to do it in a way to where it's just like everybody wins. It's not about him, he's just the guy who not only sells it, but also gets everyone excited. Is like, oh, trust me, you've never seen a show like this before, even if you feel like you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything has a slightly different feel. Like even the two Leanne Moriarty things that he's done, you can see a connection, but you would not, unless you've read the books, I don't think, sit there and go, those are both Leanne Moriarty books. I can, only because 5 years ago, I picked up these books. Was it Big Little Lies? And then it was promoting 9 Perfect Strangers, and I finished Big Little Lies, and I thought I enjoyed that story, So go on and read the next one. So I think I've read about 3 or 4 of her books. Now I can't think of the names of all of them. And then I saw they were coming out as TV shows, and I thought, well, how do you? And then I thought, well, you never know. And then this new thing called limited series, and that's the other thing. I mean, people have gone from writing episodic television where you had to have 26 episodes, of an hour. Well, I guess they're 45 minutes with commercials, but every year. So what is that? 43 minutes of programming. And now with the shows that are built for binging, the ones that are on all of these services, they're 8 to 10 episodes. Sometimes they're even 6 to 10 episodes, but they're 60 to 75 minutes with no commercials. So it's all product placement. So it's a different formula when you write that way. And I like to see how different writers, producers can handle that. Some of them can, and some of them are stuck, right? So
yeah, some of them are stuck in a genre that they don't even really like anymore. So you get that too.
Yeah. So how do they get out of that, right? I really like what Revelations Entertainment is doing, and that's Laurie McCreary and Morgan Freeman, and the two of them.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, part of Madam Secretary. They were Madam Secretary, but they've done so many things before and after, and I mean, Laurie McCreary's story is just incredible. One of the pioneers in going from someone with a degree in computer science. You wouldn't think that someone like that would be able to write and produce television, but yet she did, and she has. And all of these different shows and programs that she does with Morgan Freeman. And I mean, Morgan Freeman, what do you say about Morgan Freeman other than that this is
he believes in it.
I mean, he's just an amazing, prolific, dynamic. I mean, if he touches it, I think there maybe been 1 or 2 that maybe were not, massive successes, but just an amazing meteoric rise from, being in the electric company in the 70s, reading these stories and singing funky songs to now, doing all of this incredible stuff with the, I forget the name of the show, but where they go and they did, like Discovering God or something. and then like Atlantis, Looking for Atlantis, and
Yes.
the greatest escapes in prison and stuff like that. It's just he makes the documentary interesting, you know. And so I realize that's a little off topic too, but just the way that television has changed and the people that are involved, and it's got nothing to do with age, because if it was just to do with age, someone like Morgan Freeman would be out to pasture, because the guy is what now, like 80? 80,
Right.
you know? So there are people that are more visionary, that grew up through all of the crap that was going around, and how women and how people of color were treated, and the racism and the civil rights era and all of that, and yet are still more awake today than some people that were born in the year 2000 and are supposedly juggernauts now at 22, you know, or born in the 80s and 90s even, and they're in their 40s. And their vision is very, very limited. And so you can tell that when you get a piece of entertainment, when you get a movie or you get a show. And it's good to get people that they're just so multi-layered that every bite of the chef's surprise is a different flavor explosion in your mouth. You know, it's a program that, you know, you're not really sure, is this a comedy? Is this a suspense? Is this a thriller? And some people like their shows to be very tight, and they like their, you know, and some shows are needed to do that. But I like the ones where there's a lot of multi-layered story, where, you know, you're laughing and then you're crying and you're upset all in the same episode. And that, I think, is you know, where David Kelley has really left a mark. And you know, I hope that there are people that are studying his work and learning how to make, you know, even better television and better movies now, based on what they've learned from someone like Kelley.
That's the best way to put it. I would hope so, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's so true. Even when you're in like a screenwriting class, you know, everyone's so busy imitating, they forget, no. Actually study, you know. You wouldn't cheat off someone on the test. So same thing here, you know, just see what they're doing. Actually learn what they learned.
And then bring what you have to the table. Don't just be a copycat, you know, but be a visionary.
Oh,
do something a little bit different. And so that's I don't know that I have anything else to say other than that, but that's
it was great to have you join on here.
Yeah, it was really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Likewise, you killed the chat. You aced it.
Oh, thank you. I was quite nervous. I was like, oh my, he's going to talk to me for 10 minutes and then he's going to be like, yeah, total imposter.
Imposter.
But
I'm
well, you know,
not
they talk about
better than
imposter,
the average Joe.
right? But no, I've put a lot. You know, they say what you put 10,000 hours into, right? And we always grew up thinking in terms of like what I'm going to study in university. And I think what I've learned is that it's what you did along the way as a kid and as a person. And yeah, I put a lot of time and thought into TV. You know, I'd be home sick and have that for company. And so I've watched how certain actors and actresses, and as I said, as I learned about the credits and whatnot, to just see who had vision and who you could trust with certain topics to do them justice and to show you maybe what you're not seeing in your little community, because your little community might be very traditional and conservative, or it might be, you know, a small town country area, or you might be in a big metropolitan, you know, a venue, but feel like you don't connect with people in your city, and you're being, you know, treated a certain way, and, you know, minimum wage worker or wealthy. You know, I think we've discovered that despite all of that, people do feel a lot of the same emotions and have the same psychological needs and the same physical needs, you know, sex and love and you know, nourishment for the body and the brain. And some of these entertainment people, they get it right, and they provide a salve and they provide a platform for people to grow and to challenge themselves. And then there are people that are just looking to make a buck. And I think now we're a lot more authentic in what we're looking for. And the people that are just trying to make a buck might make a buck, but they're probably not coming back for round two. And people will stay, continue to come back, and even like take a break. Like I think David Kelley took a break for a little while there, and then has come back with these newer productions, and I'm enjoying them, you know. And there's a couple that I've missed. Like I missed Goliath and I missed out on The Undoing, but just in reminding myself that was out there, like I'll move The Undoing, you know, a little further up my list of stuff to watch or stuff to find out more about.
Totally. And it seems like you mentioned when we first started off, it's like everyone could benefit from learning who writes what instead of just, hey, there's this guy, but I only know who they are because they were on one sitcom or they used to do a lot of movies. Now they're doing TV, you know. So hopefully many will just be, you know, remembering certain names or creators who got like 3 different shows to their name.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and as I say, learning the connections and how those, I call them the spider webs. There's probably a better term for it, but I see these different connections now, and the internet, you know, social media can be bad for a lot of stuff, a lot of bullying, a lot of just screaming into the ether about frustration. But if you use it for good, and you are able to research it, I mean, from someone who had to go to the library every time I wanted to learn something and read a book that was 20 years old versus being able to look up content or to find a connection or a quote now with this little supercomputer that lives in my pocket, to be able to sit here right now and have my laptop open for the tutoring that I'm about to do, to have my iPad on so that I can do this podcast thing with you, and to have a cell phone that I'm able to do research on. It's incredible. And if we use these tools for the right reasons, then we can definitely have this new method of communication that's just going to allow everybody to get perspective on everybody else. And I think that's important.
Okay. Well, perfectly said.
Thanks. I really enjoyed talking to you today. You have a lot of good things to say, and I really like this podcast.
You aced it even more, my friend, because basically you just summed up how you get to the many stages of life, and some people can reflect what happens in your world and actually reinforce your own philosophy and open up your mind. Thank you, Mr. Kelley, for doing this. We talked about you for 2 hours.
Absolutely. We did. Holy cow, it was 2 hours. Yeah. But no, somewhere down the road, if you ever want to talk to me again, I would love to. I'm going to be looking into your show now, and I didn't know you were there, and now I know you are. And so I'll be looking into it. Yeah. And, there are some people that I know a little more about and would love to talk. As you can tell, I like to talk. So,
don't we all?
Well, not everybody. Some people are very introverted. And when they're asked to do an interview or something, they're like, no, I could never do that. And I'm like, well, worst happens is I look like an idiot for a little while. I can learn from that. I can learn from looking like an idiot for a little while. You gotta go, you gotta give, you gotta grow, So thank you very much for having me on today. I really learned a lot from talking to you too.
You were too kind and too organized, my friend.
Oh, well, you have a great day.
Okay, Godspeed to you.
We'll return after these messages.
Hey, feeling down? Feeling low? Not enough podcasts about movies in your life? Why not try?
They must be destroyed on sight.
The new podcast cure-all, sure to get you right with the world and on a path to better living. We have exploitation, we have Italian horror, we have zombies, we have slashers, we have crime films, we have spaghetti westerns, we even have sci-fi and sex comedies. So take a dose of...
They must be destroyed on sight!
As needed, and let the hosts, Lee Russell, Daniel Harper, Paul Romali, and the odd guest host cure what ails you.
Warning, may cause atrophy, African consumption, black fever, bone shave, chin cough, colic, cramp colic, dropsy of the brain, elephantitis, grocer's itch, jaundice, mania, miasma, mortification, palsy, Pott's disease, rheumatism, scurvy, St. Anthony's fire, summer complaint, and worm fit in some people. Consult a physician before listening.
Hey, I heard you like movies.
I heard you like to hustle.
I heard you like podcasts.
Well, guess what?
There's a podcast for you out there called The Home Video Hustle.
Damn right.
Every Friday, we talk about whatever movie PJ picks out the bag. What does that mean? Every Wednesday on our YouTube page, I put a bunch of movies in a bag, and PJ picks one out at random. And then we just watch it. We talk about it for maybe like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever we feel like doing, wherever the conversation leads us.
But do we actually talk about the movie?
Most of the time. Tangents galore.
Yes.
So believe me, we may be a movie podcast, but it's not always about movies. We may talk about video games, music. Yeah, that's the big one, music. Sometimes we might get a little bit of politicalness in there.
Yes.
Sometimes we may just, we know what we like to do. We like to tell stories, PJ.
Yes.
I am the master storyteller of the podcast realm. Undefeated. So if you like to hear about movies, video games, whatever foolishness comes to our mind, the most random stuff you could think of, check out the Home Video Hustle. You can find us on the Stitchers, the Google Play, Apple Podcasts,
what else?
Podbean,
what else?
Podcast Addict,
goddamn,
all that. Ain't no reason you can't get your hustle on. We everywhere, worldwide, baby.
Hustle, motherfucking hustle.
Hey, we can't cuss in the promo, PJ. We gotta be family friendly. There may be podcasts out there that don't want his hair say all that good fun stuff.
Well, you.
Don't run the listeners away, PJ.
I'm sorry.
But this is going kind of long.
Yes.
So we'll go in this and say, hey, check out the Home Video Hustle every Friday on all the various podcast outlets. Peace.
Peace.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. And while Witch didn't make it to the top of the world, he did make the Gangs of Hollywood podcast. So join the gang and enjoy a movie review podcast about movie gangs, gangsters, mobsters, and the mayhem they cause. You can find GOH Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at GOH Pod at www.gohpod.com, as well as your favorite podcast listening app. And remember, say hello to your little friend for me.
If you take two old punk rockers who are past their prime, put them in front of a movie screen and give them a podcast, what do you get? Cinema Punks. Cinepunks. It's the mixtape of movies.
Did you ever see a film at such a young age it left you traumatized with cinematic wounds? Necrophilia. It's a dead issue, man. Don't push it. Cinema Psyops is a weekly podcast documenting an ongoing experiment on the mind of an unwilling test subject.
No one should have to watch this movie.
Oh, no one should have to watch this?
No one should have to watch this movie.
Surprisingly, it's not a topic that a lot of people really want to tackle.
I'm shocked, prudes.
I know, really.
Right?
It's the next sexual frontier that no one wants to explore.
I am, in the most sincerest of senses, disappointed in you.
It takes a powerful goddess like Connie, jam her arm down the monster's throat and kill it. Oh, I'm still tripping out over that. Even as a kid, I was like, I gotta find a girl like that. Every week, I get a new look of disappointment that I never thought I could get out of her.
Unimaginable. At 12 years old, you should not be watching this movie.
Obviously.
At 13, you should not be. 14, you shouldn't be. I'm not entirely sure even 17-year-olds should be watching this.
Just because you're offended by something doesn't mean that you have the right to demand that it doesn't exist. Watching this film again, I had all of this like little nerd glee with everything that kept
little
popping
history all popping up
absolutely.
at you.
So I totally loved this film.
Hey, I know why you couldn't see that. It's because your brain's warped from watching this shit at 12 years old.
Yeah, this is a rough movie. I told you ahead of time when we were getting ready to do it that it was going to be a rough
How did you watch
one.
this shit at 12?
Because physical wounds heal, cinematic ones don't. Listen to Cinema Psyops.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey.
And I'm Zach, and we're the hosts of Podcasting After Dark, a cast dedicated to late-night horror and sci-fi of the 80s and 90s, often found on HBO and Cinemax.
You know, the movies your parents didn't want you watching as a kid. You can find us every other week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher.
This is what you want.
This is what you get.
It's time, let's check our cue, baby. Pair it with a couple brews, baby. We love good movies. We love the bad ones too. So we watch them all and pass their lessons on to you. Oh yeah. Everything I learned from movies helps to make life a little bit groovy. Whether one last plot holes or gratuitous movies, it's time to get busy with your friend Steven Izzy at eilfm.podbean.com.
Hi everybody, it's Mac Jackson. I wanted to invite you to a new site called the Forever Adventure Network. This website has everything. Pictures, videos, blogs. There's original music by Harmony Constant. 2 podcasts. One is the MacGyver podcast, where we celebrate Richard Dean Anderson, his iconic roles, and how it's influenced our lives. There's episode discussions, interviews, and life conversations. The second podcast is the Never Gets Old podcast, where we celebrate all the best things that we love in life, from TV, movies, music, and comics. The site is also the home for the MacGyver SG-1 audio series, an ongoing adventure series that continues the adventures of MacGyver and SG-1. There are also multiple stores to choose from for all of your pop culture and adventure needs. Come on by and check us out today. And thanks for joining the adventure.
We now continue with our program.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up